Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to find out if we can beat Mega Man Battle Network 3 with only the Mega Buster. 3 is widely considered the best game in the series, so I'm really excited to share this run with all of you after the amazing feedback to the first two games. I loved Battle Network 3 when I first played it 20 years ago, so we'll see if that opinion holds up after all this time. When Battle Network 3 first came out in Japan in 2002, it was a single standalone game. But it was then re-released a few months later with some bug fixes and additional content as Battle Network 3 Black version. Internationally, Capcom decided to split the two versions into parallel releases, just like Pokemon did with Red and Blue or Gold and Silver. Despite the minor differences, they are basically the exact same game. Most reviewers and YouTubers just pick one and go with it, so today we'll be playing Blue version. But all of you in the comments have had such great suggestions, so I'm also going to be doing a challenge run of Battle Network 3 White version, using bug style without any battle chips as soon as it's available. Some of you have also mentioned potentially streaming, so I'll probably give that a try so you all don't have to wait forever between these videos to get your Battle Network fix. If you'd like to see these challenges and more, please like and subscribe. It means a lot and is super helpful as we grow the channel. With that out of the way, let's get back to Battle Network 3. We're going to have the same rules as last time. No battle chips at all unless absolutely necessary. However, this is also going to be a little harder than the prior games. We're not just shooting for base in the post game, but actually going to fight the upgraded version of every boss Navi in the game. You'll see that I've updated the overlay and stats on the side here, and also included some information on the background music and video speed for whatever you're seeing on the screen at any given point. I'd love your feedback and any suggestions for the new overlay. With that, let's get started and find out if we can beat Mega Man Battle Network 3 Blue version with only the Mega Buster. We start off on a field trip to Scilab, which looks entirely different every game for some reason. Instead of doing homework or a class assignment like the first two games, I feel like a school visit to a facility focused on internet security makes a lot more sense. This is our usual 3 fights with 8 Metors that require 320 hits with the Mega Buster. This run, I've decided to set a dedicated button for the rapid fire on the controller, so I'll be able to switch between charge shots and rapid fire at a whim, rather than pressing the B button manually every single time like before. After our class trip, we decide to hang out with our friends in the park when we get approached by an adult who asks us if we're elementary school students. It might just be me, but this feels super predatory. Just randomly coming up to a bunch of 11-year-olds. He invites us onto the internet to join the N1 Grand Prix, which is a tournament to determine who the strongest net battlers in the world are. I feel like there are much more efficient ways to get this message out to the masses than randomly going up to every group of people you can find, including kids, but the story needs to progress somehow. We log on to the internet in order to go through a fetch quest, but it's pretty straightforward, so I'll just talk over it. First of all, I cannot describe how much of an improvement the internet is from the first two games. In Battle Network 1, every internet area basically looked the exact same, even when you got to the undernet. In Battle Network 2, we got a ton more variety, but now, in 3, the floors have depth, and it really seems like you're walking on glass because of this subtle reflection on the tiles. Here's a quick comparison of just the first areas of each game to demonstrate. One thing I did want to bring attention to as well is the background music. In addition to using songs from throughout the Mega Man franchise, I'll also be mixing in other music, including from YouTubers that I've asked permission from. Right now, for example, you're listening to an awesome jazz cover of the AC/DC Town theme from Dan Hikari, and the link is going to be in the description below, so please check it out when you have a chance. Just like Battle Network 2, we are basically forced to explore all of the AC/DC area right away. In the original Battle Network, there was no option to run away from enemies without the escape chip. In the second game, we did have the option to escape, but we couldn't actually do so until we upgraded our HP. Now, we're able to run away with ease from every enemy that we've seen thus far. It also doesn't make sense to grind against these enemies, because we're actually getting some amazing Zenny drops from the mystery data spread throughout the early game. Several of the comments from the last video offered a number of suggestions on how to avoid the terrible Zenny grinding I did, including saving in front of mystery data and potentially using GameShark codes. I'm going to avoid any cheating, but it doesn't even seem like we'll need any of these solutions based on these drops, As a quick side note, I know that they're called mystery data, but I always called them mystery diamonds as a kid because, they're shaped like diamonds. I'll try to say it properly, but I will definitely get mixed up here and there. Anyway, I take advantage of the great Zenny drops to buy 2 HP memories, bringing our total HP to 140. We finish off the first round of tasks and qualify for the next stage in the tournament. It turns out that in the excitement of hanging out, Dex forgot a disc for his homework at school, so we sneak into the school after dark. But the school door is already open, which is really suspicious. During the gameplay, there's actually zero music. It is pitch silent, which really adds to the atmosphere. Lan and his friends hear a bunch of noises, only to find some guy with a really bad hairdo has broken into the principal's office. We confront him, but his Navi, FlashMan, uses his beams to turn our friends into zombies and ballerinas. We find an umbrella and avoid being hit by his beams, and then we jack in. In this area, even the internet is dark, which is a nice touch. As Lan turns on the lights in the real world, the lights only flicker in the internet, which reveals the mystery data spread throughout the very short principal PC area. We have to find keys in the mystery data to get past certain gates, but the map is pretty small and easy to navigate. This flickering light gave me a real feeling of finding hidden treasures every time I saw the mystery data, so I took every single one I could, even though some of them turned out to be viruses in disguise. Nothing we can't run away from. So far, we've barely done any optional battles because we really haven't had to. We very quickly make it to FlashMan. As the first boss of the game, you'd expect someone easy, but I wasn't expecting this easy. I know that may sound cocky since I'm clearly getting hit here, but I was really using this first fight to gather information, not expecting to win. FlashMan has 3 attacks. A physical punch where he comes in front of you and attacks the 3 adjacent squares and 1 square forward, an electric attack that follows you diagonally along the floor, and after he reaches half health, he'll place 2 light bulbs on your side of the field, which won't do any damage, but can stun you and leave you vulnerable to his remaining 2 attacks. If you've been following the series so far, you'll have seen that I'm actually really bad at avoiding these diagonal attacks that change rows. I'm honestly not sure what it is, whether it's just the timing or predicting too early. I am getting plenty of practice, so hopefully that turns around eventually. This battle is very comparable to Fireman as the first boss in Battle Network 1, but definitely much easier than Airman from the second game. One of the biggest challenges with first bosses is that we barely do any damage to them. We were able to get a power up before Fireman, doing 2 damage, but we don't have access to any upgrades yet here. One of the major changes from the last game though, is that we now have access to the charge shot from the beginning of the game without having to increase our charge stat. I, on the other hand, didn't actually know this at this point in the run, but as you'll see, I figure it out eventually and start integrating the charge shot into my strategies. Either way, it is not a big deal for our fight against FlashMan. Once we defeat him, his operator tells him to blow himself up and take Mega Man down with him. His finishing move is called Shining Browser Crasher. That is not just hilarious, but legitimately terrifying, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who knows how painful it is when you're working on something and you get that dreaded not responding pop-up. Mega Man is a little banged up, but he's okay and it's time for us to go home. We find out through a cutscene that World 3 is back, and that FlashMan's operator was looking for something called a Tetra code. I'm glad that we're back to the classic Wily storyline, but it makes absolutely no sense why such an important item is stored in some random elementary school principal's computer. He doesn't even have any high-level viruses protecting it. On our way home, Dex thanks us for saving the day and gives us his internet access code. He's hanging out in the park and offers us to fight him and his Navi GutsMan. We don't actually have to accept this challenge, but like I said, we're not just going to beat the story today, we're going to fight every major boss. GutsMan is as simple as he usually is, with 3 primary moves. He can crack our panels, let off a shockwave, and punch us. As per usual, we're going to be spending most of our time in the rightmost column to maximize our rapid fire speed, which triggers GutsMan to come up to us and punch us. But this is where we run into something pretty funny. We can bait GutsMan into repeatedly using this attack by stepping back 1 square, avoiding his attack, and stepping right back in. This way, we're also able to continue hitting him given that he's not moving across rows. I was able to repeat this multiple times, but after a while, he went back to his normal pattern. It doesn't seem like this is a 100% exploitable attack pattern. It's a little disappointing that we get his chip instead of money, but as mentioned earlier, it doesn't really matter given the amazing Zenny drops on the internet already. We go to sleep and wake up to learn about a little boy looking for his brother, the best net battler in AC/DC Town. It turns out that Dex has been stretching the truth a little bit to his younger brother, Chisao. I get it though. It's pretty cute because you obviously want your little brother to be proud of you. One of the nice things about Battle Network 3 is that the storytelling has really improved, given that some of the characters get a little bit more personality. Obviously this doesn't apply to everyone, and we're not moving beyond any basic anime tropes, but it's still a welcome improvement. Now, in order to impress Chisao, we're forced to fight GutsMan V2, who has 700 HP versus the 300 from GutsMan V1. I was ready for a cakewalk, having just faced him, but V2 is noticeably faster. To be honest, I was not expecting this sharp of a difficulty spike so quickly. Because we're still doing 1 damage per pellet, this is absolutely the hardest fight that we've had so far. I'm ashamed to admit that I lost the first battle, but you don't actually need to win this fight to move on with the story. Of course, I could not accept defeat against GutsMan of all navies, so I decided to give it another try. During round 2, I tried to use the trick to get close and bait out his punch attack, but it didn't work as well as it did during the V1 fight. For those who aren't familiar, one of the most useful tricks for the Buster is to get as close to the enemy as possible. Thank you to all of the commenters who are so much better at explaining things than I am. The Buster is actually a projectile that does have a travel speed. It takes some time to reach the enemy, so if you're all the way on opposite sides, it'll take much longer than it would when you're right in front of them. The Buster can only shoot so many times when there are already pellets on screen, and as a result, you shoot faster when the ones you've shot prior have despawned. This is in part a callback to how the Mega Buster works in the classic Mega Man series, because in the original games, you can only have 3 Mega Buster shots on the screen at any given time. It's a really minor thing, but this makes a big difference in bosses. Going back to GutsMan, the safest spot to be is in the middle column here, because we can't get hit by his punch, and we have plenty of time to avoid his shockwave attacks. If GutsMan decides to crack all the panels on our side, we're safe from any attacks as long as we're in the back 2 rows, and as mentioned earlier, the middle row is preferable to the back row because you can shoot slightly faster. Despite trying to rapid fire as much as possible, GutsMan V2 takes over 8 minutes in real time to take down. After the fight, Mega Man is still feeling the effects of FlashMan's attack, and we decide to go visit our dad at Scilab. He's not in his office, but his colleague gives us a temporary substitute PET to house Mega Man. As we walk out, the creepy adult from earlier promoting the N1 Grand Prix chases us down and tells us that we're about to miss the next stage of the tournament. I really don't understand. Everyone else is sending emails, so why can't this guy? We log on and access the Scilab computer area through this internet train thing. It's actually a pretty cool visual, even though it's completely unnecessary, since we could just have a regular warp there. We also pick up some more HP memories from the new vendors we have access to. I'm not really going to grind or reset mystery data for Zennies unless I actually have to. For the sake of the narrative, I'm also not going to make note of every single HP memory I pick up, but most merchants in the game sell a few, and we get access to more merchants every time we get a new area, including the Scilab Square here. During this tournament subquest, we need to go through a survival battle that includes several fights in a row. The last one is this fight with a Meteor 2, a Canadum, and most dangerously this Ellaball. None of the enemies here are difficult on their own, but as you can see from this battle, there is quite a bit of maneuvering necessary in order to avoid being hit. I really have to be quick on my fingers, and it took several tries since we're doing such little damage, and the Ellaball can be a little unpredictable. We're trying to avoid it as it floats around, and then it randomly stops and spins balls of electricity around it. While we're avoiding its attacks, it's very easy to forget about the Meteor 2 and the Canadum, which can rack up damage very quickly. It's during this part of the tournament subplot that I realized that the Charge Shot is actually available to us, which does a default 10 damage, or basically multiplies our base buster damage by 10. Compare that to Battle Network 2, where it was multiplied by 5. That game was pretty brutal for a while, and if you haven't checked out the video yet, I really hope you decide to give it a watch after this one. It's also around now that we start seeing one of the major themes throughout Battle Network 3's enemies: limited vulnerability windows. For example, there are enemies like the Boomer and Hardhead, where we can't just stand in front of them and spam pellets. These types of enemies were present in the prior games, but Battle Network 3 takes it to a whole different level, and we're going to be highlighting some of those examples soon. Based on absolutely nothing scientific but my gut feelings, I would say that Battle Network 2's fights had a general theme of area management, with area grab and cracked panels and so forth being a major point of emphasis, while Battle Network 3 is more focused on limited vulnerability. Once we're done with this subplot, Lan's dad comes home and offers to fix our PET. It's great timing because the next day, we have to go on a multi-day school trip to the Yoka Inn. The next day, Lan and his friends have a really fun time, including this really cute pillow fight. Lan's dad sends us an email with a Navi customizer, or NaviCust for short, and this is going to be one of the most important additions to our arsenal. The NaviCust effectively replaces the power-up system from the first two games and uses a block-based system to determine what kinds of upgrades we can use. We'll get a whole bunch of NaviCust programs throughout the story, including several that are needed for us to progress through the story. One of the best parts of the NaviCust from a strategy perspective is the concept of trade-offs. Unlike power-ups where you're just continually adding to your strength, we're going to have to make choices on what we want and what we don't want every battle that we fight. This includes situations where we may have to reduce our attack power to increase our HP, or decrease our HP to implement some story-required programs. It adds a level of strategy that I'll talk about as we face some of the more challenging bosses in the game, and I'll also have the current NaviCust programs shown in the overlay to the right. To start, we get an attack +1, a speed +1, and an undershirt, which acts like an endure from Pokemon. This means that if we're going to die from a particular attack, we'll instead survive on 1 HP. If we use the NaviCust improperly, it can trigger some bugs. And if we regularly play with bugs in our system, our next style change will be the bug style. Another absolutely shameless plug here, but please subscribe so that you'll be the first to see Battle Network 3 White with bug style as soon as it's available. Back to the field trip. We have to join the class at the zoo, but on our way, we can fight Tamako, an optional boss with the Navi Metal Man. This is a really interesting fight because there are moving gears throughout the middle row that can damage you, and one of Metal Man's attacks is a metal blade that goes around the perimeter like a boomerang. This is not a particularly hard boss, and it's made much easier by the fact that our Buster now does 2 damage and also shoots out slightly faster. He also has a missile attack and telegraphs what panel it'll fall on, but Metal Man typically stands in place and takes a bunch of pellets from us while he's doing this attack. His moves are pretty easy to avoid, but I get hit by basically everything because of how greedy I am, trying to squeeze out every blast pellet I can before he attacks. We go to the zoo and have to talk to every character and animal in the zoo. This is a really frustrating progression mechanic as a player, since you're not focusing on what the characters have to say, but rather just trying to mash the A button as much as possible in order to move on. I do admit that the sprites for all the animals in the zoo are pretty cool though. We're looking at the lions when all of a sudden, all of the animals break loose. We have to go through an emergency back door and find out that Chisao, Dex's younger brother, was caught by a condor and is now stuck on top of an electrical tower. Even though the story has improved, you really do have to suspend your disbelief for a lot in this game. We jack in and go through a bunch of really cutely themed animal stages. There's a very basic puzzle where we have to find programs that match with the virus blocking the way. So for example, if there's a frog, we need to find a snake program to eat the frog, or if there's a hungry gorilla, we have to find a banana for it to eat. Fun stuff. Along the way, we pick up another HP memory as well as some NaviCust programs, including Charge +1, Sneak Run, and HP +100. These are pretty self-explanatory. It would be great to be able to use all of them, but we have limited space and can't use the HP +100 without sacrificing our attack +1. At this point, I don't think that the trade-off is worth it, and we make our way to BeastMan. Turns out that one of the zoo staff members is a World 3 operative looking for the second of 4 Tetra codes, which they will use to trigger Cybergeddon. The naming of different things in this game is not the best. BeastMan, on the other hand, is a tough boss given that he moves very quickly. I start off trying to use the charge shot, since now we're doing 20 damage per shot, and charging a little bit faster due to the charge +1 we just picked up. However, I switched strategies after a while because it's pretty demoralizing to charge up and miss every single time given how fast BeastMan moves around. He starts off with 2 basic attacks, a diagonal rush charge and a wide sword style slash across the 3 panels in front of him. They're pretty easy to avoid, but he doesn't stay in place long enough for me to punish him. After losing the first fight, I switched to basically going pellets only for the second try. Once he hits half health, he introduces a 3-part attack, including 2 diagonal slashes after which his head comes rushing at you horizontally. It's not that hard to avoid, but it still hits me plenty of times. I didn't really get the feeling that I needed to be on top of my game to beat BeastMan, and this ends up proving true, as we're able to get by him in just over 4 minutes. After this, all of the zoo animals calm down, and even though we save all of our friends, including Chisao, we're too late to stop World 3 from getting their hands on the second Tetra code. A month later, we want to hang out with our friends, but instead get dragged along by Higsby to run some errands delivering ships or collecting debts. One of the interesting things to track is how assets have been reused or go unused from game to game. So for example, Battle Network 1 had an entryway to the school, but 2 just sent you straight to the classroom. Now in 3, the school mostly has the same structure, minus the courtyard and a few rooms here and there. In Battle Network 2, we had a few extra rooms in Yai's house, but now it's just her bedroom. Higsby's shop is one of the ones that we're returning to from Battle Network 1. The shop has had mostly no impact on our Buster only playthroughs thus far, and will likely stay that way except for potentially being able to get some Navicus programs, but we'll get back to that. Once we're done with the errands, we have to take on a challenge for the N1 Grand Prix, where we have to find 5 people dressed as Navis in the real world. Once we beat them all, we have passed the final qualifying test, and we are officially invited to join the N1 Grand Prix. The next morning, we go over to Mail's house and meet Miss Mari and Mr. Higsby. Mail just got a new internet integrated dishwasher, and everyone wants to check it out. We have to run another quick errand for Higsby, which includes running a WinStar chip. We go to the Yoko internet area, remove our sneak run Navicus program, and have to intentionally try and do slightly poorly against these enemies until we get what we're looking for. While running these errands, we try fighting Mr. Famous, who is in Yoka in front of the zoo with one of the few exclusive Navis to Blue version, Punk. While we're here, we also find a speed +1. Our stats are going to be pretty interesting from now on, since historically, we've used our power-ups to focus on attack and charge, whereas with the Navicus, we're going to be at the mercy of whatever programs we find to fuel our development. This is an extremely difficult fight for where I am in the game right now in terms of both damage output and HP, so I'll table this optional fight for later. Once we finish running these errands, we find out that the dishwasher was manufactured by World 3 and will soon explode. So we log on to find BubbleMan, who seems to be the culprit here. The text makes it seem like the dishwasher explosion is a universal thing affecting everyone who bought the dishwasher, so why is BubbleMan conveniently only in front of Mail's internet access point? We give chase, and he leaves a trail of bubbles that we follow all the way to Yoko area, but we can't access him because of these really thin paths blocking us. We go to our dad's lab and receive the Press Navicus program, short for Compress, and try to install it onto Mega Man. We aren't able to do so, and Higsby doesn't know how to install it either, but time is running out. We head out of Mail's house to look for help, and run into an adult with glasses and a scruffy beard. The game keeps his name very vague and ambiguous, but I don't know what the harm is in saying it, so I'm just going to say that his name is Dr. Cossack, and we'll get back to him later. He's been casually walking around town, but he comes up to us and is able to install Press right away, meaning that now we have exactly what we need to chase BubbleMan deep into the internet. Press is one of several story-required Navicus programs, which will mess around with our configuration, but will also allow us to shrink and access a whole lot more of the Yoko area. When we get to BubbleMan, he summons a bunch of henchmen who we'll have to chase across the internet. After the first fight against BubbleMan's henchmen, we get access to our first style change. This time, we get Woodguts. For those of you who've been following the series thus far, we received Woodguts as the secondary style in Battle Network 2. I caught a bit of flack from you guys for not experimenting more with Woodguts in the last run, so today, I'm going to try and make sure that we experiment as much as possible with whatever style I get. We do need to talk about some of the major changes from styles between Battle Network 2 and 3. First off, you can only have one style at a time, unlike Battle Network 2. Just like Battle Network 2, the Gut style doubles our attack stat, and our buster speed is no longer limited to 1. The Woodguts charge shot is a tornado that goes 2 squares in front of you and does 10 damage across 8 hits, meaning that if you hit an enemy with all of them, the charge shot does 80 damage. But our buster speed is no longer limited to 1. In this game, however, we get a machine gun or Gatling gun buster. That means that when we rapid fire our pellets, we are locked to whatever panel we're on and can't move around for a little bit, but we do shoot out 6 or 7 pellets in very short succession. Unlike the normal pellets, Getting hit by this makes bosses flinch, just like chips and elemental charge shots. We'll get to see some of the pros and cons of this new buster shortly in our fight with BubbleMan. In this fight though, BubbleMan stays glued to the rightmost column, meaning that we can't reach him without an area grab, which obviously is off limits because it's a battle chip. This fight took me many more tries than I expected, given that we can't just blindly rapid fire. The arena has a hole in the center of BubbleMan's side which releases bubbles that occasionally have enemies inside them. If we don't pop the bubbles, we'll get hurt when they hit us. Sometimes, the bubbles have a fish inside them that is immune to our buster and rushes at us. And if we're stuck in place due to the Gatling gun, we may not be able to move out of the way in time. BubbleMan himself doesn't do much damage in his first form, since he occasionally throws a crab our way. There's also a rock on his side of the field, and it's actually a priority for us to break that down in order for us to be able to hit him when he's in the topmost row. After BubbleMan reaches about 120 HP, he switches to a diving form, surrounding himself in a bubble and hitting us with 3 tridents when we're in the same row as him. In addition, there's a new enemy that can come out of the bubbles, but it's not much of a threat. The battle itself isn't very difficult, but it's really just a matter of whether or not we can manage our Gatling gun rapid fire. Unlike the last game, where we maintained full navigation capability, we are stuck in place when we use the Gatling gun, and it is really difficult to describe how annoying it is to see an attack clearly coming our way and not being able to dodge it due to the lag. Thankfully, after a few tries, I'm able to practice some restraint and stop rapid firing when we see the fish in the bubble, which makes a big difference and wins us the fight. After the battle, BubbleMan asks for mercy and tricks us, and we basically let him go. ProtoMan makes his first appearance in the game when he comes by and finishes BubbleMan off for us. Lan ends up having a major ethical crisis because his failure could have led to thousands being killed, including Mail, but he didn't just want to become a heartless edgelord killer like Chod. After Mail, Miss Mari, and everyone else who bought the dishwasher is saved, everyone goes home safe and sound, but Lan is really starting to question his values. The game doesn't actually go into any answers, given that, this is an early 2000s Game Boy Advance game aimed at kids, but it's really interesting whenever a game discusses ethical dilemmas about where to draw the line. There isn't much time to sulk though, because it's finally time for the big event. We also see a cutscene with Chod and his dad. It turns out that Chod's dad is a rich jerk who only cares about victory and may not even come watch his son in the tournament, which explains a lot about why Chod is the way he is. Lan has to do an interview for the N1 Grand Prix, which takes us to a new internet area, Beach Area. Here we find a charge +1. Later, there's also a cutscene with Chod and Lan's dad, and it's clear that Chod is resentful towards Lan due in part to his family. If only he knew how much of an absentee father Lan's dad really is. For the first 2 games, the guy basically only showed up for the last third. Then, we go to sleep and wake up late for the Grand Prix. We go to a new area, Beach Street, and meet one of the competitors, Tora, who comes from Netopia. His Navi is Kingman, and we lose the first fight with him. Once again, the Gatling Buster's lag makes us a sitting duck for Kingman's chess pieces to just stomp all over us. However, this isn't one of those optional battles you can retry immediately. The story moves on. So just like the optional fight with GutsMan, I reset, because I'm not about to accept defeat here. Based on the comments from the prior videos, this was one of the fights that people said would be really difficult buster only. Boy, you were right. I even tried this with normal style because I want to see if the additional movement capabilities were enough to bring us over the edge. But once again, the additional attack power from Woodguts is really hard to give up. Kingman has 800 HP and hides in the rightmost column, sending out 3 chess pieces at a time to attack us. He's too far to hit with a tornado charge shot, so the pellet is really our only option. The pawns can basically only use longsword, while the knight jumps around our side of the field and has a shockwave attack. However, he basically uses an area grab style move to pin us in the back. The chess pieces are invulnerable to the buster, so we can't take them down the easy way. Kingman moves around in the back column, and once we figure out the pattern of the chess pieces, it's actually quite easy for us to manipulate them into going up and down at a regular cadence. We have to be patient and only shoot Kingman when he's at the topmost or bottommost row. There's such a small window when he's in the middle that it's usually not worth the risk of getting hit. Every once in a while, the pawns get desynced and we get damaged, but after nearly 7 grueling minutes, we finally take Kingman down. Now it's time for the main event. There are 4 groups of 8 for 32 net battlers in total, and in our group, we meet this guy, Net Battler Q, who is dressed like a demon. Super creepy. When the announcer actually introduces everyone, Lan is introduced as the student who saved everyone from World 3 and Battle Network 1, meaning that this 11-year-old kid is famous. It's really crazy to think that this happy-go-lucky 6th grader who always gets into hijinks with his back against the wall is actually one of the most famous people in the entire world. It seems like, despite being famous, no one on the internet or in the real world actually recognizes Lan or Mega Man. That's probably a good thing, because to be honest, it would probably get to his head. How have they not explored that already? Hint hint. Blatant foreshadowing. Back to the tournament. We have to take a boat to Hades Island where we go through a competition to find 4 victory cards. This place really creeped me out when I was younger, but looking at it now, it's an extremely short set piece. One thing to note is that Lan's dad sent us an expansion pack for the Navicust, allowing us to use even more upgrade programs. Now we have the space to add an HP plus 100. Back to the tournament. In the next fight, we face Metalman V2. We've actually fought Metalman already, so this should be an easy fight, right? However, there are 4 doors we can choose from. We fight Metalman behind each door, but the arena's panels actually change depending on which door we pick. First, I chose randomly and we ended up on the lava stage, which does super effective damage to our woodgut style when we step on it. So I immediately reset until we find the grass stage door, which actually heals us while we stand on the grass. However, this is actually a harder fight than you might expect due to the woodguts. The Gatling Buster's damage output is absolutely insane, but it's not as free as it seems. Bosses getting invincibility frames after we use our buster isn't always a good thing, since they can get started on their next attack without us being able to dodge or interrupt them, unlike the traditional pellets that don't stop hurting our enemies. I did try to use the charge shot in some of my attempts, but since it only shoots 2 columns in front of you, it was very difficult to pull off the spacing and timing on a consistent manner. Overall, it's not a super complicated battle, especially with the boost that we get from the grass panels. Next, we have the option to talk to random people throughout Hades Island and change our folders to go fight GutsMan V2, who we actually already fought back when Chisao came to town. It doesn't matter which folder we use, since we're not going to use any of the chips, but this GutsMan fight is a joke. We're finally able to use our charge shot to its fullest potential, drawing out GutsMan to the closest column for his punch attack, and then stepping back to hit him for 80 damage. There's not much to say about this fight, since it can be won in so many different ways, whether it be the Gatling Buster, the charge shot, even using normal style and the upgraded charge shot would be significantly better than the single damage pellet fight that we fought earlier in the game. Finally, we're done with the island adventure, and it's time to go back to the studio for the semifinals. We fight Tora again, and I honestly forgot we'd have a mandatory fight versus Kingman, otherwise I wouldn't have wasted several minutes of my life doing the optional fight. It's literally the exact same fight and mostly goes the same, except for Kingman changing up the formation of his chess pieces towards the end. This throws me off a little bit since I was in such a rhythm from the prior fight, but we just barely finish Kingman off before his knight can stomp us down. After we win, it looks like Chad and ProtoMan are having some trouble against Net Battler Q. It turns out that underneath the creepy costume is the announcer, who actually works for World 3. Surprise, surprise. Another plotline, another World 3 bad guy. He's taken Chad's father hostage, and we have to fight his Navi, DesertMan. Very similar to Kingman, this battle is a major test of patience. DesertMan has 2 pillars guarding him, and 2 hands that turn into lions that rush at us. He'll occasionally turn 2 of the panels on our side of the field into sand twisters as well. The real issue with this fight is that we can only hit DesertMan with 1 attack at a time, meaning that with our 4 damage buster, it would take us over 200 hits to take him down. We can only hit DesertMan once per cycle, and as you can see, this is taking forever. I tried using my charge shot, but DesertMan disappears to his next cycle as soon as he's hit, meaning that we can only hit him with 1 of the 8 hits from our tornado charge shot. He basically rotates between 4 different formations. We can take the lions down pretty easily as well as the stone pillars. Halfway through, DesertMan starts using one of his hands and turns it into a stone block that can land on top of us. It's not hard to avoid unless we're stuck in our Gatling gun position and can't move out of the way fast enough. We're doing so little damage and it's taking so long that I inevitably end up dying in this war of attrition. I took a step away to think about what kind of alternative Navicust loadout we could use to have a better shot against him. This is probably a good time to mention the mod tools that are available to us now. The Navicust has a certain number of rules that prevent us from breaking the game, such as not being able to line up certain types of colors or blocks in certain patterns. I'm not going into all the details since it doesn't really matter, but we can buy the mod tools from a guy here on Beach Street for 5,600 zennies, and it really allows us to change the run any way we see fit. We can effectively use the mod tools to turn off certain errors or get access to additional power-ups. This may seem like cheating, but there are a few caveats. 1. It's built into the game, and many of these codes can be found speaking to NPCs. 2. There are major downsides to using these in-game. For example, I thought that we could use the HP plus 900 mod tool upgrade to get the additional stamina we needed to beat DesertMan, but there's a price for the extra HP. We actually leave poison panels after we step on a panel, meaning that it would actually hurt us and reduce our survivability in a long, drawn-out fight like the one against DesertMan. These kinds of codes could come in useful for future battles, but definitely not this one. I see mod tools as a strategic trade-off, so we'll take it on a battle-by-battle basis. It's not like we really need something extra to beat DesertMan. Perhaps all we need is a little patience, and maybe just a little bit more attack. I go back on the internet and rack up some zennies using the mystery data spread throughout. We go and grab an attack plus 1 from the Beach Internet Square net shop, and our power goes to 3, meaning that our Woodguts Buster now does 6 damage. We have to sacrifice our HP plus 100 in order to fit the new attack plus 1 into our Navicust, but in my opinion, it's a worthwhile trade. As you can see, the battle goes a lot faster, but it's also because I now understand his attack patterns a bit better. It's just a matter of manipulating the sand hands and actively trying to take both of them down as soon as possible. In the second half, he won't actually be able to use the troublesome sand block attack if his hands aren't there to turn into sand blocks. One of the things I consider during this long fight is to use normal style mega and just use the charge shot when we have an opportunity to. And I figured that I probably would do that if I actually ran into issues during this fight. Maybe we'll consider that option when we do our rematch with the stronger versions of DesertMan. This battle is really long, so perhaps it's worthwhile talking about a little bit of that. The fights that we have during the typical story are what I would consider V1, or the weakest version of each Navi. Sometimes we'll have a second fight, or V2, such as when we faced GutsMan. However, hidden throughout the internet, we'll actually have the opportunity to fight V2 and V3 versions of each of these Navis. Beyond that, there are actually Omega versions, which are slightly harder than the V3s, and time trial challenges, but we'll get to all of that later once we hit the post game. As you can see, once we figure out the strategy, the battle against DesertMan is pretty anticlimactic. Similar to Kingman, BubbleMan, and several of the enemies that we face throughout the game, DesertMan is a prime example of an enemy that is not very strong and is not very difficult, but really has limited vulnerability, meaning that our Buster just won't have a chance to do the damage that it can do. This battle takes over 7 minutes, meaning that we have just gone back to back fighting two of the longest boss battles in the entire series thus far in Kingman and DesertMan. Once the battle is over, Chad arrests the announcer and we put an end to the World 3 plan. The tournament is cancelled, and Lan and Chad do have some unresolved tension since they were expecting to meet each other in the finals, but it's a really touching moment for Chad given that he was able to save his dad. We flash to a cutscene where Wily is pissed, but he's got 2 of the 4 Tetra codes that he needs. He calls in Aneta, a woman who really believes in protecting the environment, and Wily is manipulating her into thinking that by taking down the hospital, she'll be furthering her noble cause. This is a nice twist on the one-dimensional villains that we've seen thus far. The reality is that most of these throwaway villains of the week don't even have a single dimension. We still barely get any backstory aside from evil person is evil, but it's nice to know that there's a little bit of thought being put into things here. During the course of the N1 Grand Prix arc, Yai actually fought Net Battler Q and got physically injured, so we go visit her in the hospital on Beach Street. It's actually really weird to think that so many people must be injured or hurt throughout the course of a game series like this, but we've never been to the hospital until now. While there, we're introduced to Mamoru, a sick child who's undergoing an operation. He recognizes us from the TV footage for the N1 Grand Prix and is really excited to meet us. About time that we meet some of our adoring fans. He says that he loves net battling and asks that we come see him again. He's a good kid. In the meantime, Yai is recovering well, and we go home to find Tora visiting us from Netopia. This is pretty wholesome, since Lan and Tora seem to legitimately respect each other's abilities and stuff. However, he does end up taking advantage of us a little bit. Tora asked us to run a bunch of errands for him at the Scilab request board. We have to run a bunch of fetch quests, including getting a Yo-Yo 1G, which requires us to get a busting score of 8 or above against a Yo-Yo enemy in Beach 2. This took a surprising number of tries despite our buster upgrades because it still takes time to take them down with our pellets. There's also a request where we have to fight off 3 viruses, including this mole that likes to dig underground and jump behind us. It's not that hard to defeat, but like everything else, it's not vulnerable most of the time. We can only hit it when it pops up behind us, after which we need to maneuver around it and hit it with a few pellets. Because it's only one panel in front of us, our charge shot isn't an option here. It took so much time waiting for these moles to pop up that at some point I just pressed the reset button and decided to switch to normal mega and attack using our 30 damage charge shot. We also get an email from Tamako about her homepage, which allows us to access the beach internet area. Tamako's homepage is going to end up being one of the most important places in the game for us because through her homepage we can access the Yoka area, beach area, and eventually the undernet pretty conveniently. I wonder how she feels about some random 11-year-old spending so much time next to her stall. I can't imagine that's exactly great for business. While I'm here, I also try fighting Punk again. This is another example of a battle where the enemy is only vulnerable for certain parts of the battle, given that our buster can't pierce through his armor just yet. Yes, that is foreshadowing for later. I start this battle off very poorly, trying to time things and not having a good read on how to avoid most of his basic attacks. I spend a little bit of time trying to see if the charge shot can help us out here, but after making close to no progress, I revert back to the buster. Our Gatling buster is really effective here because even though we're sitting ducks when he attacks, he does flinch. The big issue is that I was shooting the buster randomly. However, after a little while, I start figuring out how to punish him. I basically try not to shoot him until after he attacks, at which point I'll get ready to shoot the Gatling buster at the panel that he was last on, which is where he'll return after completing his attack. That stuns him and allows us to get a full clip of the Gatling buster in. I'm actually pretty proud of the second half of this battle, given the comeback required after doing so poorly on the first half. After completing the errands for Tora, I decide to do a few optional Scilab requests in order to get HP memories and some zennies. One of these requests leads us to Yai's phone, where we fight an enemy that has 2 viruses named the Twins. However, this is where our run runs into a little bit of an issue. The gimmick with these enemies is that they must be eliminated at the same time, and we're not going to be able to do that with our current buster and setup. Maybe if we had heat guts, we could use the flamethrower to defeat them at the same time once we've brought both of them down to below 50 HP each. Or alternatively, Aqua Guts' charge shot is a bubbler that also affects the square behind whatever it hits. In Battle Network 3, we get a new style every 100 battles instead of 280 like the last game, so we'll hopefully be able to try out a new style sooner rather than later. As of now, I won't be able to complete this request, but this isn't a major issue because this is an entirely optional fight. You can't accept a new request until you completed the last one, which means we won't be able to take on any new quests until we figure out how to deal with the twins. With that detour out of the way, we find out that Dex isn't at school, and he had been acting pretty weird for a little while now. We soon find out that he's actually moving to Netopia to spend more time with Chisao and his father. The game makes it seem like a really emotional farewell, and although it doesn't hit the mark perfectly, I'm really glad that Dex got a bunch of screen time recently to demonstrate their friendship. The next day, we have nothing to do and decide to visit Mamoru at the hospital. It seems like our visit means a lot more to him than we could have expected. He's been sick for so long that he's never been able to go to school and didn't have any friends. It turns out that he actually has the same heart condition that killed Hub, Lan's twin brother who was converted into Mega Man. We offer to get him an ice ball, which we can find at Hades Island if we equip a Fish Navicus program. However, Mamoru takes a turn for the worse, and the doctor tells us that he needs to undergo surgery as soon as possible. Before we get the ice ball, I decide to do some exploring since now the undernet is open to us. There are a ton of mystery datas available to us now that drop a lot of zennies, and I use this to buy up more HP memories. We pick up the ice ball and bring it to Mamoru, telling him about our brother Hub, and that even if there's a 1% chance that Mamoru makes it through the surgery, Lan and Mega Man are supporting him and want to see him better. We come back the next day to support Mamoru through his surgery, only to find out that 3 hours in, the hospital is overrun by vines as the Tree of Life in the middle of the hospital has been taken over by Aneta from World 3. Mamoru's surgery is at risk because of the power outage, so we go to the basement and jack in order to beat PlantMan and put an end to the vines. In this area, we have to use the Oil Body Navicuss program to attract fire-type enemies and get their chips in order to burn the trees blocking our way. It's a pretty cool mechanic, but the downside is that we're woodguts and double weak to them. We do get healed on grass panels though, which is a nice plus. Depending on how you see this challenge, using battleships for this story-driven, overworld plotline could technically be using battleships and not only using the Mega Buster. And if that's how you see things, our challenge run might be over here. Personally, I don't see this as philosophically against the rules because we're using the battleship the same way that we would use any one-time use item. Once we run into PlantMan, he dismisses us and sends a goofball our way. This here is the rematch of the century. This time, we have a charge shot that bypasses his shield and can actually hit the goofball because it hits 2 panels forward. We make quick work of it, which is a very welcome sight on my end after the fight in Battle Network 2. One thing I was curious of later in the game was whether our prior strategy of rapid firing still worked in this game, and I gave it a shot, so here's some future footage. Despite a number of attempts, I couldn't actually get a single shot in, which makes me think that the developers identified that the goofball had a vulnerability in the last game and adjusted it in this one. It's really impressive considering how quick the turnaround was between these games, as Battle Network 3 came out just 12 months after 2. Maybe this was one of the bug fixes that they put in the upgraded black version. As far as I understand, the International White version also included all of those bug fixes, but we might as well give this a shot in the next playthrough for the heck of it. Once we make it to PlantMan, we find out that he's after the 3rd Tetracode. He has a whopping 1000 HP, he moves around a decent amount, but is in range for us to use our charge shot. So in my first attempt, I choose to charge up and wait for his movements to align with him being 2 panels ahead. He has 2 major attacks, a needle attack that shoots straight in front of him, and a vine attack that follows us and can potentially trap us. Most times that I attacked PlantMan with a charge shot, I ended up trading damage and taking a hit of the needle attack. After he reaches half HP, he brings out 2 plants which I'm assuming do damage and probably afflict us with something. I try staying out of their way so I don't find out. However, this limits my movement pretty significantly and I die. In round 2, the battle goes mostly the same way. However, this time there's a lot less trading of hits. Instead of just depending on the charge shot, I mix in some Gatling Buster, especially when he uses the vine attack since it's basically free damage. I start guessing where he's going to move and preemptively use the charge shot since there's plenty of time to move out of the way and there's very little punishment for guessing wrong. Before using his vine attack, PlantMan actually stands in place and is vulnerable for a little bit, so I take advantage of that and charge shot him while he's using it. Looking back at the fight, I probably played much more conservatively than I had to, but that's what rematches for the upgraded versions are for. After just over 3 minutes, we have our win. Even though we've beaten PlantMan, the operating equipment isn't back up yet, so Mega Man uses his own energy to start up the equipment again, which could have hurt him, but it ultimately leads to Mamoru's surgery going successfully. While it looks like everything is all happily ever after, we get a cutscene of Wily talking to Bass about employing his services. Good. We want to fight him anyway. We start a new day by hanging out with Yai and Mail at the park, and notably missing Dex. Yai mentions that we can visit him quickly using her private jet. If she had a private jet, why did we have to go through all the commotion of going through TSA and dealing with a hijacked plane during the last game? Miss Mari, our teacher, comes up to us and tells us that now that we've saved the day at the hospital, we're in line for a commendation. We're officially going to get an award from Scilab and be recognized as a hero. On our way, we meet up with the mysterious Dr. Cossack again, who tells us that even though he's at Scilab, he's not a Scilab scientist. After our commendation, we decide to visit Mamoru, but on our way, we run into Mr. Match, the operator of Fireman who worked for World 3 during Battle Network 1. He says that he's turned a new leaf and is now helping Scilab, but Lan and Mega Man are suspicious. We do get a report though that a bunch of Navis are terrorizing the internet, and Mr. Match gives us instructions on where we can find them so we can delete them. During the last fight, we're outnumbered, but Mr. Match's new Navi, FlameMan, jacks in and defeats a number of World 3 henchmen in one go, so we decide to start trusting them. Once we check in on Mamoru, Mr. Match asks us to help him by installing some programs throughout the machines at Scilab. The next day though, we find out that the programs that we helped install actually increase the temperatures of Scilab to unbearably high levels, trapping several people inside, including Lan's dad. Mr. Match lets us know that we're the reason that Scilab is the way it is, and Lan's ego after being named a hero is knocked down several pegs. We have to go throughout the internet and put out a ton of fires using the same energy change Navicust program as we used in the hospital. And this time we use the fish program to attract water viruses. I couldn't find any water viruses in AC/DC, so we jack into Tamako's stand and make our way to Yoka area, where we find plenty of them. Once we've taken care of all of the flames, Mr. Match tells us that FlameMan is waiting for us in Undernet 3. When we get there, we feel a bunch of tremors throughout the internet, but don't catch that there's a Navi following us. We then finally reach FlameMan, who has 1000 HP. The battle here is interesting as he has 2 candles behind him, which can turn into one of 3 colors. Green makes him invincible, red heals him, and yellow makes some flames appear on our side. FlameMan himself has one real attack, where he shoots a bunch of flames on the panels in front of him. We need to be really careful since we take double damage as Woodguts. FlameMan jumps around pretty often, and in order for him to do any damage to us directly, he needs to get right in front of us, so he usually ends up in our row. After he reaches half health, his flame attack can start expanding from one row to ultimately all 3 in the back of our side of the field. The strategy here is actually quite nuanced. You guys ready? Step 1. Go to the top row and use the Gatling Buster. Step 2. Go to the bottom row and use the Gatling Buster. Step 3. Repeat. It's really that simple. Our goal is to make sure that the candle in the back is put out, but FlameMan inevitably jumps right in front of us every single time. When he flinches and goes invulnerable, the Buster still shoots through him, so we can take out the candle as well. After I figure this out, I still make a couple sloppy mistakes, but end up winning with a first try victory. After the fight, it turns out that the tremendous power causing the tremors is none other than our good friend Base. He says that he feels someone strong, and then absolutely roasts FlameMan by saying that it's not him. He says that the peon is gone. Absolutely Shakespearean. We fight Base in a back-to-back fight, but there's basically no way we can win this one. We get taken out, and the Navi following us reveals himself as someone from Scilab who holds the power of the Dark Aura. He takes a hit from Base and survives, leading Base to flee for now. This gives us enough time to wake up. However, it looks like Mr. Match was able to get the last Tetracode for Wily, which he entrusts to DrillMan. We fast forward a bit, and Lan is really sad and mopey. His friends regularly check in on him, but he's just sitting there wallowing in self-pity. One moment, he was a hero, and the next, he was an accomplice to the villains, and worse yet, he almost got his own father killed. That's a lot to take in, I'm not going to lie. But Mega Man asks Lan how long he's gonna sulk, since all he can do is make amends now. Chad also comes to visit, telling us that Wily has all 4 Tetracodes, and the only way to stop him is to go to the Undernet and get the Forbidden Program, which is the only thing that can potentially stop Alpha. Because ProtoMan is so well known, he can't do it himself, meaning that Mega Man's generic design is going to come in really handy here. I think that this plotline is a little bit of a stretch, because first of all, Mega Man's design is not that generic, and second of all, Lan and Mega Man are famous for literally taking down World 3. They were all over the TV not too long ago. I don't understand how underneath a rock these people on the Undernet have to be in order to not know who Mega Man is by this point. After a bit, we check in on our dad at the hospital. We walk in on him talking to Sean, the boy from the airplane who ran Gospel from Battle Network 2. He explains that after he lost his parents in a car crash, he spiraled into a deep depression and spent all of his time on the internet until he was approached by a Navi who asked whether he wanted to rule the cyber world. Then, he started doing everything that the Navi told him to do, which ultimately led to him forming Gospel. Lan can't keep quiet, so he interrupts and Sean leaves. After which we admit to our dad that we were at fault for causing the fire that almost killed him. Our dad says that Sean here is doing his best to make amends and share what he knows, and that we should do the same thing. While I get that Sean was like 10 years old, he literally killed people and destroyed a ton of property and probably left a whole bunch of people with some major health issues from the incredible amount of radiation in that building. He may not deserve to spend life in prison if he was being manipulated, but getting off that scot-free is a little concerning. The encouragement from our dad helps us get out of our funk, and we agree to take on Chad's quest of obtaining the Forbidden Program. We get a Navicust program called Black Mind, which forces us to change our configuration again. We'll need it in order to go through a ranking process on the Undernet, which allows us to meet a Navi only known as S, who'll be able to point us to the forbidden program. We make our way to the Undersquare, where we buy a really expensive HP memory. There are a bunch of heal Navis that we'll have to fight in order to even be considered for the ranking, but this is where we run into a major spike in difficulty. I've been running away from most random encounters since we don't get much for fighting them, but in these fights, even enemies like this Meteor Omega are pretty difficult. Its shockwave is really fast and leaves behind cracked panels. The Canadums are also extremely fast. These Beetle Omegas can shoot their mini-bombs twice, which is much more difficult to predict. The Fireball from the Spiky Omega is incredibly fast, and we're double weak to it. It's just insane with the difficulty spike here, since everything is so fast and does so much damage. I've been facing the weaker versions of these viruses for so long that I was lulled into a false sense of security whenever I saw a Meteor or a Spiky. I experienced an embarrassing number of deaths against these unranked heal Navis. So far in the game, I had really depended on the power of the Gatling Buster to just plow through whatever was in front of me, but these enemies move way too quickly, have way too much HP, and hit way too hard for me to just stand there and tank attacks while shooting them with the Buster. Eventually, I have to figure out their attack patterns and get lucky enough with RNG to be worthy of achieving a ranking. After that, we go through a bunch of hide-and-seek scenarios with very ominous and vague guidance on where to go next. We have to find these ghosts, most of whom we have to fight. After beating a few, we get an email saying that Mail is in danger and that we have to save her in the zoo computer. Turns out to be a trap, and that these unranked heal Navis we fought want revenge. More Omega level enemies. It turns out, however, that the 8th ranked Navi is BeastMan, who we already fought. Wiley found out about the forbidden program and wanted one of his own to secure it to ensure that no one else could use it against him. That's actually pretty smart on his part. But this is not an easy fight. BeastMan was already tough, and he moves so quickly that we couldn't really get full clips of the Gatling Buster on him. And we're usually sitting ducks and very vulnerable when he decides to come on our side and do any number of attacks. He can attack from in front or behind us, so I decide to stay in the leftmost column. But this also means that we're stuck if we don't react fast enough, which I rarely do. After a few tries with Wood Guts, I switch back to normal style Mega. I was able to get his attack pattern down since he's not drastically different from his first form, but V2 is much faster and does much more damage, so we use our charge shot as often as possible to attack him when he returns to his side after one of his attacks, since he always returns to the last panel he was on before the attack. After reaching low health, BeastMan starts using the same attack as before, where he does 2 diagonal slashes and his head comes flying at us, but that just makes him an easy target for a charge shot, so we welcome it. We're finally able to make it past BeastMan and achieve rank number 8. The downside here is that we have another battle with the prior number 8 right after, and we only have 20 HP after the BeastMan fight. It's not particularly difficult, but I was on high alert and really had to be on top of my game to make it through this. That Fishy Omega is fast, and we only have the top 2 rows available to us because of the lava panels along the bottom row. After this, we have no leads to find number 7, so we check out a message from the forum that tells us to go to a certain dead end on the Undernet. Surprise, surprise, it's a trap. They try to destroy us with the boulder, but all of a sudden, GutsMan comes in and saves the day. He takes care of all of them in one go, but they call out for CopyMan as they're being deleted. As we look to jack out, we face the number 3 ranked Navi, CopyMan. This is where we have to fight GutsMan V3, and this is, as expected, an extremely easy fight, albeit a very long one. When he reaches below a third HP, he starts using his Z-Punch attack, where GutsMan becomes invincible and starts throwing out punch projectiles that do a decent amount of damage. While this is pretty easy to avoid, all of the panels on our side are broken most of the time due to GutsMan's panel cracking moves. This took me by surprise the first time and I get deleted. We do a little better with the timing for the next round, and this time we have 2 rows to swap between when GutsMan executes his Z-Punch attack. That's more than enough room for us to get by GutsMan V3 and earn rank number 3 from CopyMan. It turns out that rank number 2 is BubbleMan. This is one of the other unique bosses to blue version, as white version has MistMan. I've never actually faced MistMan before, so that'll be interesting to try when the time comes. Anyway, BubbleMan has 1000 HP, but this is a much easier fight than it looks like. He has a few attacks, including shooting bowling pins across all 3 rows. If we shoot at one of the bowling pin projectiles, it doesn't actually get destroyed, but instead has a chance of flying over to our side and hitting one of the panels, usually the one that we're on. BubbleMan can summon a bunch of bowling pins on our side, after which he starts rolling bowling balls, which can do decent damage. But as you can see, BubbleMan gets flinched out of all of his attacks from our Gatling Buster, so my strategy is literally to just stay in the middle row and do nothing but spam it. He's going to move into the middle row to attack us most of the time, and we just try to beat him out of the attack. We are trading a lot of damage as we're getting hit very frequently, but the strategy is as successful as it is straightforward, at least for this version of BubbleMan, and we earned the number 2 rank. We find the Undernet server beneath the hot springs of the Yoka Inn. We jack into the area behind the Undersquare and meet Serenade. The forbidden program can only be obtained by a chosen one, and after some difficulty, Mega Man ultimately proves that he is chosen. If he wasn't, the game and the entire world would have been torn apart, so you have to thank the arbitrary requirements and opaque Deus Ex Machina for adding some nice drama. And to think, Capcom was doing so much better with the writing. But as we jack out, we find out that Mamoru, yes, Mamoru, the wheelchair-bound, sick child we befriended at the hospital, is actually the administrator of the Undernet, as he is the son of the original Scilab scientist who created it. It turns out that the entire Undernet was actually created for the sake of safeguarding the Forbidden Program, and that's why there's such high-level enemies and security there. It actually only inadvertently became a haven for criminals and shady folks because no one went there. During our conversation, however, DrillMan is able to access the Alpha program by destroying the gates in Scilab 1 with the Tetra codes, and we're basically in the endgame now. DrillMan drills a hole into Undernet 5, and this is also where we take a quick detour to Undernet 6 to buy the Bustermax Navicus program. The merchant here sells programs in exchange for bug frags, which is something I haven't gone into at all. In Battle Network 2, there were a finite number of bug frags spread throughout the world, whereas in 3, you can earn an unlimited number of bug frags by defeating an enemy in the middle of its attack. I only have 30 bug frags when I reach this merchant, but I could hypothetically grind for the 150 that we need for Bustermax. I could have gone back to AC/DC Area 1 and spent hours getting the 150 bug frags, but all of you in the comments have been really supportive, and my mental health really thanks you in advance for letting me skip this mind-numbing grind. I use a GameShark code to hack in a bunch of bug frags and buy the Bustermax. Now, this is really interesting because like it sounds, it increases all of our Buster stats to 5, and then our attack is doubled due to Wood Guts. However, this program does have a bug associated with it, which is that any chips that we select will be used instantly upon starting a turn. Luckily for us, we're not using any chips, so there's basically no drawback at all. With that, we're ready to fight DrillMan. At 600 HP, he has much less health than most of the more recent bosses, but that is more than made up for by how difficult it is to hit him. Similar to so many other bosses and enemies in the game, DrillMan is invulnerable to our Buster for most of the battle. He will send out 2 drills and himself to randomly fly across the 3 rows, and he's invulnerable while he's in this form. He also has an attack where he creates 3 holes and sends drills out through them. DrillMan is actually hiding behind one of these holes and can be attacked, but I didn't actually know that at this point. He also has an attack where 3 panels are broken underneath your side, along with some falling rubble on the remaining platforms. It turns out that when he's coming at you in drill form, he's mostly invulnerable, but after a certain number of hits, he flinches and resets back to the middle row in the rightmost column. This is ultimately the best way to hit him, guessing which row he'll show up in and doing my best to maneuver around the otherwise inconsequential standalone drills. We just barely hang on and defeat DrillMan. Despite us beating him, Base comes and says that he can't let us take Alpha. We use the forbidden program on him, Giga Freeze, but unexpectedly, Base catches it with one hand and leaves with Alpha. It seems as though the end of the world is coming. Lan has a dream that he's in the cyber world with Mega Man, where Mega Man calls him to say goodbye. That's some interesting foreshadowing here. The entire world is in a state of emergency. There are a bunch of these frog-looking military robots everywhere, and people can't even use the metro system freely. We have to get a bunch of official clearance to go save the world, so we meet up with ProtoMan, and along the way, I decide to get the World 3 ID from a request on the Scilab board, which requires us to be tested by an official. We have to fight a series of single Omega level enemies in a row. But speaking of enemies that have long invulnerabilities, this Viney Omega is really annoying. We can't actually hit it except for its vines, and it takes forever trying to bait out its vines to do a charge shot. You can also use the Gatling Buster, but the charge shot seemed like it had higher DPS for this particular fight. Like a surprising number of fights in this game, it took forever, and I would not be sharing the true experience of playing Battle Network 3 Buster only if I didn't mention fights like this. You might also remember that I could only do one request at a time, and I was blocked by the twins who we had to defeat at the same time. I feel really bad about this since I didn't know going in that request could be a potential soft block for the challenge, but I brought them down to 10 HP each and used a panel out chip to defeat them both. Because the request is entirely optional, this is absolutely something I would have avoided, but because I'm playing this game after 15 years mostly blind, there's no way I would have known. After this, I go through a bunch of requests to increase my HP through HP memory rewards, as well as fight V3 of Metal Man. Anyway, that's probably enough errand running for now. We find out that our dad has escaped from the hospital upon hearing the news of what's been going on with the world, so we go to Scilab and find him at his office. He tells us that Alpha was actually the original prototype of the internet, created by his father and our grandfather, who is this universe's version of Dr. Light. However, Alpha started eating everything in sight and needed to be contained. He couldn't be deleted, so Lan's grandfather implanted a Guardian program to stop Alpha. Lan's dad reveals that Alpha was traced to an island with demon waters. We hijack the old boat that took us to Hades Island, retrofitting it with the new engine from Yai. But honestly, how the hell does an 11-year-old know how to swap engines on a boat? We go to Beach Street to take the boat by ourselves, but are joined by our good pals Dex, Tora, and Chad. Yai and Mail are also there, but we ask them to stay back. It's a little misogynistic, but up until this point, we have never fought roll or glide in battle, even though we know that they're pretty capable net battlers. The boat takes us to Wily's new base. Honestly, how many abandoned islands are there where Wily can get all the materials and manual labor required to build such elaborate headquarters, and how does he manage the electricity? Is he using solar panels? Is there an electrical utility he's hooked up to? If he is, doesn't the utility company see that there's a huge amount of energy being used in the middle of nowhere? Also, why is the water purple? We walk into the building, but can't find a way out of the first room. We're all stuck and confused, until Dr. Cossack comes in, who reveals that he was in charge of the Independent Navi project. This is all really great news, but how did he get here? Does he have his own boat? He reveals that he's actually the creator of Base, and he's here for some unfinished business. He sits down in this machine that uploads his consciousness to the cyber world, and he opens the door for us. On his way back to Jack Out, he meets Base, who says that he isn't supporting Wily, but wants absolute power. After the Navi Elite Corps attacked him, Base said that he hung on by a thread and was attacked by hordes of viruses every day. It's actually a pretty sad backstory for Base, and it makes sense why he hates humans so much and wants revenge. He was made against his will, and then when he was deemed too dangerous, they tried to kill him, after which he had to struggle to survive. It's a pretty common backstory, but a compelling one nonetheless. Cossack decides that he's going to take Base down with him, since it's his fault that Base was created in the first place. He starts channeling the Spirit Bomb, but the damage leads to him getting hurt in the real world. Dex takes him to safety as we move on. The headquarters has a number of overridden military robots guarding the doors, which have annoying timing-based puzzles. At the end of the first robot, we fight FlashMan V2. Our Gatling Buster makes quick work of him. We basically stand in place and just try to flinch him out of his attack, since he's moving around quickly and usually ends up in front of us. Unfortunately, not a very exciting fight. After the battle, FlashMan goes for his attack again where he blows himself up and hurts Mega Man, but this time, Kingman steps in and stops that from happening. On to the next one. In the next robot, we fight BubbleMan V2 halfway. It's still not an easy battle because of how we're stuck in place from our Gatling Buster, but we have a ton of HP and do 10 damage per Buster pellet now, meaning that we can easily remove the bubbles from the play area and tank most of his attacks until he goes down. At the end of the robot is DesertMan V2. This is as long and painful as the first time we fought DesertMan, but thankfully we're now doing 10 damage per hit rather than 6. However, he does start with 1200 HP, meaning that we have to go through 120 cycles of hitting him. Please, I'm telling you, never do one of these runs through Battle Network 3. If you don't get really lucky with your style, some of these bosses become real tests of patience. After this, we almost get crushed by a boulder and find Chad surrounded by flames. At the end of this robot, we have a back-to-back fight with PlantMan and FlamMan. The strategies are effectively the same for both of these bosses. For PlantMan, we use the Gatling Buster to interrupt his attacks, and try to limit the number of trades. When he summons the 2 flowers after reaching low health, we dispose of them immediately with the Buster. FlameMan is almost exactly the same as before. Top row, Gatling Buster, bottom row, Gatling Buster, and repeat. There really isn't much more to say here. At the end of the final military robot, we have a rematch with DrillMan. Unlike the other bosses, he is still the same original form as the one we fought at the end of the last chapter. I don't really change up my strategy at all, it's basically the same fight, except we have more HP. We finally reach Dr. Wily's chamber, where he's about to jump into a pulse transmission machine to be uploaded to the cyber world and fused with Alpha to destroy the intranet. We find a conveniently open machine and jack in. This really bothers me, not just for the Deus Ex Machina, but because it's asymmetric. There's 2 machines on one side and 3 on the other. But hey, we'll take it. We log in and combine with Mega Man. It's actually a really touching moment, since Lan and Mega Man have never met each other face to face like this. We walk through a bunch of red ooze, only to find Bass and Wily, with Bass destroying the Guardian program and releasing Alpha. He tries to absorb Alpha and we begin the battle. Bass has 1000 HP, but the biggest challenge for us is that he has an aura, which we can only break if we use an attack that causes 100 damage or more. We can't break through with our charge shot, even if we level up Wood Guts, because the charge shot is actually separate weaker attacks. Even at max damage, the Wood Guts Tornado Shot is 8 hits of 20 damage each, which totals 160, but we need an individual attack to do 100 in order to break this aura. We unfortunately have to switch our style, since there's only one that can do 100 damage in one attack. Just like Battle Network 2, we're gonna have to bring back our old friend, Heat Guts. I thought of and looked up a number of different strategies, but this was the only one I could find without battle chips. I would love to hear in the comments below if any of you have come up with or come across anything better. Instead of doing 100 battles until we came across the style change that we needed, I used a GameShark code to trigger a style change after 1 battle, enabling us to get the Heat Guts quickly. I also equipped 2 weapon level up Navicus programs because unlike the last game, the charge shot gets stronger with Navicus programs rather than standard power-ups. With this, we are able to do 100 damage with our charge shot and take out Bass's aura. This story fight against Bass is pretty straightforward. Each of his attacks does 100 damage, but he's largely unchanged from Battle Network 2. We can basically flinch him out of all of his attacks with our Gatling Buster rather than our charge shot this time. But I promise, the final Bass battle won't be a pushover like last game. After we beat Bass, Alpha absorbs him and then Wily shortly thereafter. We get fully healed as we enter the final boss. Alpha is an interesting boss because he has a gelatinous covering in front of his core and he has 2 arms that constantly attack us. He also has machine guns on his shoulders and lasers that shoot from his eyes. But despite all of this, this was a shockingly easy fight. Our Gatling Buster makes quick work of the jelly covering and we're basically able to attack him non-stop. I'm taking a bunch of damage from all of his attacks, but Alpha doesn't have a flinch mechanic like most other bosses in the game, so he also takes continuous damage from the Gatling Buster. We get as close to him as possible, and he goes down very quickly. This final boss battle was a little anticlimactic, but as I'm sure you're aware, the best is yet to come. After we take down Alpha, there's a door in his place. We walk in, only to find a very old version of Scilab. It looks like an old archived file that has stored Scilab as a point in time. Grandpa Hikari shows up and tells us that he, as the creator of Alpha, locked himself in the Guardian program all this time to make sure that Alpha wouldn't be reawakened, and the core of Alpha that we jacked into will fade away, including Grandpa Hikari. This touching meeting is cut short by Alpha starting to be destroyed. We can't jack out directly, so we head back to the jack-in portal, but as we do, we get swallowed up by a remnant piece of Alpha. Lan and Mega Man are stuck in the darkness, and Mega Man says that they'll both soon disappear alongside Alpha. In a really moving scene, Mega Man sacrifices himself to release enough energy to at least let Lan escape. The dialogue here is really well done in my opinion. It's touching, it's moving, it points to all of the ups and downs that they had along the way. I also really enjoyed the foreshadowing here. It's not like Mega Man unlocked a new power, since he already used his own energy to turn on the hospital equipment with Mamoru, and we saw FlashMan do the same thing to hurt Mega Man. But the dialogue is about how Mega Man is grateful for all of the good times and bad, and how happy he was to finally meet Lan face to face. He had already died once as Hub, and the second chance that he got as Mega Man wasn't something he took for granted. Lan starts begging and bargaining, and asks how he's going to do anything without Mega Man. He promises to even start doing his homework and waking up on time as long as Mega Man comes with him. But it's too late. Mega Man is gone. And when Lan wakes up, his friends drag him kicking and screaming back to the boat so that they can make it back home. When everyone reaches home, we receive a hero's welcome. Even Chad gets recognized by his father to some degree. Lan gives his dad some data that Grandpa Hikari gave him. We fast forward several months. Lan is about to start 6th grade and he has to get a new Navi. He's been spending all of this time getting his act together in honor of Mega Man, but he needs a new Navi for school. It's time for him to officially say goodbye. We fade to black and see the credits roll. Battle Network 3's story isn't going to win any awards, but the team really wove a tight narrative together, with each arc having some strong ups and downs. A creepy night at school with FlashMan, a tournament arc gone wrong with DesertMan, a surgery at risk with PlantMan, Lan putting his own father in danger with FlameMan, and ultimately the self-sacrifice at the end. We come across a post-credit scene where Lan's dad was able to decipher the data from Grandpa Hikari. Lan wakes up, only to find his new Navi saying an all too familiar, "Good morning, Lan." Damn. I mean, of course, we all knew that Mega Man was coming back since there are 3 more games in the series, but they really did make you feel Lan's pain that Mega Man was gone. After a few generic endings, that was a really strong one. But, as always, there's more danger looming in the postgame. Behind the undersquare, the giant circle where we got the Forbidden program from Serenade is actually the entrance to the secret area. A new area with absolutely crazy enemies and a number of secret bosses, just like the postgame area in Battle Network 2. But before we get to that, we have some unfinished business. We can now start fighting the upgraded versions of bosses that we faced thus far, so I'm going to do a quick run through of each in the order that I did them. As mentioned, we've already fought Metal Man, so check mark there. Outside of the World 3 headquarters, we're able to fight Tora and Kingman. Could have just done the same thing as the first battles, strafing up and down and using the Gatling Buster to flinch Kingman every opportunity I got. However, the chess pieces move a little too quickly to get a full round of Gatling pellets out. We end up doing just 20 to 40 damage each time, so I decide that it's worth trying out normal style Mega. As a quick side note, the max HP will be a little off in some of these fights, given that I lost some of my video, so I redid a few of the fights in order to get new footage. This battle is mostly error-free, since we're just trying to find Kingman between the gaps. We do get hit a couple times, but we don't have to be perfect in order to defeat Kingman V3 with the normal style buster. Next, we can fight GutsMan and Dex. We already fought V3 in the form of Copyman, but technically that's not GutsMan, so we do the same thing and finish GutsMan off in under a minute despite some very lazy play on my part. Kingman and GutsMan V3, check. Next, we decide to fight BubbleMan. We actually have to fight V2 first, but these fights are also nearly identical to the first versions, with the key difference being that we actually have to start dodging. During the first fight, we tried to tank everything that BubbleMan sent our way, but now we take too much damage from each hit to use that strategy. We actually have to be patient for a good amount of the battle, and wait for BubbleMan to use his bowling ball, avoid the pins falling on our panels, and attack him in between his movements. It was a nice, unique boss, but I'm glad it's over, so let's check that off. Next, I go for FlashMan. V2 was in a specific spot in AC/DC 3, and then V3 was available as a random encounter anywhere in AC/DC 2. You actually know that the V3 boss is roaming in an area when there are certain fights you can't run away from, even though the enemies are easy enough that you should be able to. The enemies here weren't a problem, but this will cause problems very shortly. FlashMan V3 has 700 HP, but it's just as easy as ever. He uses the light bulbs that stun us a little bit more frequently, leaving us vulnerable a little bit more often, but I'm going to take the tried and true strategy of tanking and then using the Gatling Buster to flinch and take him down. The battle lasts under a minute. Next, I give Mr. Famous and Punk a shot. However, before we get to V3, we need to beat V2, which is causing us a ton of problems. He is just invulnerable so much of the time, and it's very difficult to avoid his quick moving attacks when we're stuck in place from the Gatling Buster. I try using my charge shot in one battle, but we have a similar issue with the significant delay from shooting the flamethrower and then the associated end lag. I decide that we need to change up our Navicust a little bit, and I use the Break Buster program, which allows our buster to pierce through guards. We get this program from leveling up our gut style, and also have a similar program called Break Charge, which does the same thing for our charge shot. So for example, the Break Buster program would allow us to shoot pellets through goofballs and their shields, or even hardhead cannon enemies. All of a sudden, Punk becomes a joke, because we can attack him through all of his otherwise invincible attacks, and interrupt almost every single attack to flinch him and then reset him before he even gets to us. There is some randomness involved with which direction he's going to go, and sometimes Punk starts his up and down roller attack too close for us to avoid or flinch him out of it. However, once I get the hang of it, the battle becomes really easy and we beat Punk with 1 HP left. Coming up, we take on BeastMan V3, who can be found in Land's doghouse. It's pretty funny. Here, the unavoidable random encounters are with the spiky dogs, and I start the BeastMan battle with less than maximum HP due to some sloppiness from fighting those viruses. However, BeastMan is still the same as before. Despite the difficulty spike from the first upgraded fight, we're now fully used to the higher speeds and damage from all of these upgraded enemies, and we now just stay in the middle column, sidestep to avoid his attacks, and start using the Gatling Buster in the spot that he's going to re-emerge after his attack. Check. Up to the batter's box is DesertMan. This time he has 1600 HP, which would have been a nightmare if we used the same strategy as before, hitting him with 1 pellet at a time. Now that we have heat guts, we can hit him with our flamethrower, so I trade the break bust for weapon level ups to do 100 damage per hit. The battle takes less than a minute and a half, which is a huge improvement from the V1 fight. Let's check that off as well. In order to find the final version of BubbleMan, we actually need to be in a state of low HP while running around beach internet area. I intentionally take a ton of damage and walk into the fight, but it's actually dangerous because we're now weak to his water type attacks. The bubbles coming out of the middle panel on his side felt like they had very few of the invulnerable fishies in them, and the crab that BubbleMan throws consistently fell straight into the hole in our middle panel. As a result, we were able to get a bunch of damage into BubbleMan really quickly. After what felt like a billion tries, I get really lucky with my maneuvering around all of the different moving parts towards the second half of the battle. Of all of the fights in the game, BubbleMan has consistently been one of the most challenging because it feels so attainable, but at the same time is so difficult and out of reach. When we finish off BubbleMan, it's time to find DrillMan V3 in the Hades Island computer. One of the things to note here is that the mandatory enemy encounter here are the moles that are really annoying to deal with. This time when we run into our friend DrillMan, I equip the Break Buster and get to work immediately, since our buster now actually destroys the drills firing at us and can flinch DrillMan almost all the time. This turns the battle from a test of endurance to a test of patience. The challenge is gone since we can mostly just stand in place and shoot pellets except for when DrillMan breaks the ground beneath us. But the battle is mostly uneventful, and the only reason it was as close as it was is that I wasn't taking it as seriously as I probably should have. Despite us figuring out how to move past his invincibility, the battle ends up taking just over 5 minutes because of how much time DrillMan spends off screen. Either way, 2 more wily villains checked off the list. I forgot about PlantMan for now, but we'll get back to him later. Now it's finally time for us to get to the real challenge, the super bosses in the secret area. The secret area is pretty cool. It has this awesome music in the background, and right now you're listening to a remix of this made by Chief Takinawa, who mentioned in his comments that others would be able to use it as long as he was credited, so the link for this awesome remix will be in the description below. In order for us to fight the first boss of the secret area, we need 140 chips in our library. I use a GameShark code to fill out the entire thing, so we're ready to face DarkMan. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It looks easy, but DarkMan was a legitimately difficult boss. He moves around the field and changes color every time that he does, alternating between purple, blue, and orange. In the purple form, he shoots forward a row of flames like FlameMan. In the blue, he shoots a slow-moving snowflake that does super effective damage to us as heat guts, and in orange, he has an electric laser attack that stuns us and is probably his scariest move. He also has a Shadow Axe attack that follows us and does 5 consecutive swipes on the panel that we're on. On top of all of that, he has an attack that unleashes 3 portals above our columns, releasing slow-moving bats that move downwards. That's a lot of attacks, and as you can imagine, a lot of different things to keep track of at the same time. While all of the attacks are easy to avoid on their own, the challenge is that multiple of them will be happening simultaneously, and the coordination can get very difficult. For his orange attack in particular, it does so much damage and stuns us that we're almost sure to be hit by something else, like the bat or the axe. After several tries, I realized that this is not working, so I installed the HP plus 700 mod tools code. If you recall, the downside of using the HP plus 900 was having poison panels on the ground beneath us, but the downside of the HP plus 700 is that we have 2 fewer chips available to pick from our custom gauge. That's actually perfectly fine because we aren't using chips anyway. That brings us to a total 1860 HP going into the fight. You may ask, am I cheesing this? Is this against the spirit of the game? The answer is up to you, and I look forward to hearing what the comments have to say so I can adjust the strategies moving forward. During my first several tries, I wanted to finish him off as soon as possible, so I took every opportunity I could to attack him, including when the bats were moving. The downside here is that when we try to use the Gatling Buster, we're stuck in place, and it's a lot harder than you'd expect to move out of the way even though the bats are moving so slowly. Instead, we focus on taking advantage of the blue form, where we can get our attacks in without being at a ton of risk ourselves. Towards the end of the battle, I get a little sloppy and start taking a bunch of hits that could have been easily avoided, but regardless, we're able to move past DarkMan and move on to Secret Area 2. Before that, I realized I forgot FlameMan and PlantMan's B3 forms earlier. There isn't much to say, since FlameMan still goes down to the strategy of up, Gatling, down Gatling. After we beat FlameMan, we can get an item from the Undernet called the Hammer that allows us to break down these monoliths in the secret area. Upon breaking them down, we go through a series of back-to-back virus battles. The first several of these are manageable, but before we can get to the end of Secret Area 2, we need to break through the security machine. Like Battle Network 2, we cannot beat these with just the Buster alone. I've tried looking far and wide for a way to break through them, but I couldn't find one. If anyone has any suggestions, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. So finally, we have to use chips to defeat an enemy so that we can move past these security machines. The boss of Secret Area 2 is JapanMan, who is this samurai looking guy. He doesn't have his own theme, but I found this amazing custom song made by a YouTuber named Snuffles. He also mentioned in his comments that we could use his music with credit, and I would definitely suggest you check out his music in the link below. JapanMan himself is a surprisingly easy boss. I don't want to report to the HP mod tools unless we find it absolutely necessary, so we go in with a normal loadout using Breakbuster, and the battle is super straightforward. He gets flinched out of almost all of his basic attacks by our Gatling Buster, and he regularly moves just in front of us. The danger is actually getting hit by a follow-up attack when he still has invincibility frames after being flinched. However, it's extremely easy to just strafe up and down in the leftmost column. At half HP, JapanMan brings out a bunch of little enemies who take out our area one panel at a time and do a small attack once they get there. This is a little problematic compared to the rest of his attacks, but ultimately, JapanMan V1 is still a first try victory. Just like the other bosses, there's a V2 and V3 for each of DarkMan and JapanMan. One thing to note here is that the mandatory enemy encounter is actually the shadow enemy that can only be hit by sword damage. The only way I could figure out that we could use sword damage was by using the anti-damage mod tools code for the Navicust. For those who haven't used it or don't remember, anti-damage is a chip that lets us jump in the air and use a shuriken that does 100 damage to an enemy upon getting hit. The Navicust version, however, does 50 damage, so it's not something that we could have used against Base and his aura. I never actually figured out how to get it to work, but I believe that there must have been some sort of incompatibility bug with the Buster Max or some other thing that I was doing. Even though we can't beat the enemy, we can still reset until we find what we're looking for. In the upgraded DarkMan fights, I go in with the HP plus 700 mod tools loadout again, except this time I include Breakbuster in my configuration. I focus more on dodging and surviving than just maximizing my output damage. Even when we do have an opportunity to attack, I'm going to avoid it if he's in the yellow form, since that's when things can potentially snowball out of control in terms of damage taken. I really try and exploit the blue form whenever it's available, since our Breakbuster can destroy the snowflake and get a full clip of Gatling Busters into him, which is a huge relief. The upgraded JapanMan fight isn't even worth talking about. The field has some grass panels as well, so we can start off with getting some double damage flamethrowers in. I honestly just zoned out for parts of the battle and still won on the first try. Now that we're done with these two secret bosses, we've unlocked the ability to fight yet another series staple, ProtoMan. Holy, there is so much to do in this postgame. We can fight Chad on Hades Island, but we can only unlock V2 and V3 of ProtoMan after defeating DarkMan and JapanMan. I'm not sure if it's just me, but unlike ProtoMan in Battle Networks 1 and 2, he is really damn hard in this game. In the first two games in the series, ProtoMan had a very discernible pattern that was pretty easy to dodge, but now he's really quick and has range everywhere, with no easily identifiable tells on what he's going to do next. I go in with Heat Guts as usual, and hope that the flinching mechanic will take care of ProtoMan like it has most other bosses. There's one major issue with this fight though, Gatling Buster lag. He recovers very quickly from the flinches, and usually moves on to his next attack while we're still planted in the ground from our Gatling Buster lag. His attacks are very hard to dodge since you can't tell what's coming, and I usually end up predicting one thing and falling straight into the hitbox of another attack. I switch back to normal style because we really need the mobility here. I'm going to skip showing the testing rounds, but I decide to use the charge shot to punish ProtoMan after avoiding his attacks, rather than using pellets every opportunity I can, because the pellets are just too weak. I also go in with the Super Armor Navicust program, which allows us to keep our charge shot despite being hit, but it also causes an error in the Navicust that I fix with the mod tools. As for ProtoMan's attacks, he can come up to us and do a wide sword, either behind or in front. He has a really annoying 2-row Sonic Wave attack that he can do multiple times in a row and is very difficult to avoid. He can also come up to us and use a longsword, which is thankfully very telegraphed and easy to punish. After a while, I start to realize that there are certain attacks that he likes to string together, but you'll notice that one of the attacks that I constantly get confused by is whether he's going to go for another Sonic Wave attack or come to our side of the field and use Wide Sword. I almost immediately have to guess what he's going to do, because there isn't enough time to recover if I predict Sonic Wave and he uses Wide Sword and vice versa. This battle took a lot of attempts in order to memorize his patterns and get lucky with some predictions. Now that we're done with all of the V3 bosses, it's time for the king of the undernet himself, Serenade. In Secret Area 3, in order to fight Serenade, we must beat another set of non-busterable security enemies, as well as break down another one of the monoliths with a gauntlet of battles we have to win. Once we get to Serenade's door, we must have collected all 200 standard chips, which I obviously game sharked in. When we get to Serenade, he says that he's the Undernet's administrator, and that he wins out of respect and mercy. Given what we've learned about Mamoru lately, it is heavily implied that he is Mamoru's father's Navi that was passed down to Mamoru after his death. Serenade has 2000 HP, but only has 3 real moves. The first is a reflector that can basically send almost all attacks back in our direction. I know that there are some exceptions out there, but the only thing that matters to us right now is that the Buster or Charge Shots can't penetrate this reflector. Next is a slow-moving ball of light that floats across the entire battlefield. It's pretty easy to avoid. This idea of having to wait until the enemy is vulnerable also harkens back to the task that we had to run for Mamoru earlier in the game, getting him an Ice Ball M from a Cold Head, one of the cannons that's only vulnerable when it attacks. Speaking of, Serenade's final attack is his most powerful, Holy Shock, where he comes to the middle row of the closest column to us and cracks panels. This initiates a gust that pushes us to the left and damages certain panels that we may be on. However, it's when Serenade uses this attack that he's the most vulnerable. There are plenty of videos on the internet of how to beat Serenade using area grabs, but I've never seen a Buster only example or even a forum post, so I knew I had my work cut out for me. Also, this song was made by the same artist as earlier, and holy crap, it is a great theme for Serenade. Give it a listen after this video, link in the description. For this fight, I used a bunch of battles to trial and error different strategies, but the final loadout was using Super Armor, Break Charge, and 2 weapon level ups. This means that the flamethrower does 100 damage, and Super Armor allows us to keep our charge shot level even if we're hit by something, which is most likely going to be the Holy Shock. Break Charge allows our charge shot to pierce guards as well. I'm not sure if this was necessary, but we had the space in our Navicust, so I thought why not. I also used the mod tools to increase our HP by 700 since we didn't need the extra 2 chips anyway. The idea was to keep evading the ball of light and waiting for Serenade to use Holy Shock and hopefully get a hit in with our flamethrower. It is very possible based on RNG for us to be hit, and I'd be okay with trading hits most of the time given our huge HP stat. But believe it or not, once we got the hang of it, it was very easy to make sure we didn't get hit. By standing in the middle panel, Serenade's Holy Shock would attack that panel first, but because of the gust, we'd be blown to the back column by the wind, meaning that we automatically avoid it and are still in range to use our flamethrower. This flinches Serenade and takes him out of his attack. Unlike most bosses, Serenade didn't seem to add something to his arsenal once he hit low HP. In the winning battle, I got a little nervous towards the end and took some really easily avoidable hits that made the battle much closer than it needed to be. By the end of it though, I really felt like I could have taken Serenade on without taking any damage if I really focused, but thankfully, you guys aren't here for me to redo fights until I get them perfect, right? I'm not going to try it now, but let me know if you guys would be interested in a run of a Battle Network game without taking any damage. After beating Serenade, we win the Undernet ranking of 1. Technically, that makes us the king of the Undernet, but we all know who that title really belongs to, Base. Base also resides here in Secret Area 3 along with Serenade, but in order to reach him, we first need to make it past this door of love. It's really unclear what this requires, so based on what I read online, I first did all of the remaining requests on the Scilab board. They were long and tedious and really painful, but ultimately that was wrong, since that opens a different door somewhere else. Instead, we actually need to complete the virus breeding mechanic introduced in this game, where we randomly fight a family of a particular virus somewhere in the internet, but they remain friendly to us and we transfer them to this PC where we feed them bug frags. I've never done this before, I don't know what it does, I don't care what it does, I just want the damn Secret Area 3 door opened. After all of this, we come across a bug frag trader. We also have a monolith and a secret path that leads us to the Navicus program Hub Batch. This monolith is one of the hardest challenges in the game and includes a shadow enemy that we can't beat without using sword chips. However, the Hub Batch is probably the most insane program in the game. It's like 9 Navicus programs in one, including Break Buster, Super Armor, Break Charge, Shield, Undershirt, and Air Shoes. The downside to this though is that our maximum HP gets cut in half, which is a major trade-off. When we get back to the bug frag trader, we have to feed it 300 bug frags, leave from where we entered, jack out, and then go back to Secret Area 3. When we get back to the area, we're approached by a powerful force who has been feeding on the bug frags that we fed the machine. He doesn't remember his own name, but Base GS is ready to fight us. In terms of strategy, I came up with 3 loadout ideas, and here's how each of them went. Number 1. I decided to try using Hub Batch to get all of the associated perks, and accepted the downside of half HP, which maxes us out at 580. This time, Base has a 200 HP aura that we can't break with our normal charge shot. Unfortunately, in order to finish this fight, we will need to very sparingly use at least one battle chip. The one I chose was the Northwind chip, which removes an enemy's aura, so I buy 2 of them and then put them in my folder. During our first fight, we get Northwind right away and remove the aura immediately. Base uses his electric rush attack, which is extremely difficult to avoid, and it basically feels like we lost all of our HP in one hit. There are also some random bugs associated with this loadout, including losing HP every second, almost as though we're poisoned. As you can see, some of Base's attacks do absolutely insane amounts of damage, and we are barely getting through a quarter of his health. It's not clear whether or not the benefits of Hub Batch are worth it in this particular fight, and so we move on to strategy number 2. This time, we abandon Hub Batch and use 2 weapon level ups to get a 100 damage charge shot. This alone won't be enough to get rid of his aura, but if we use the grass stage chip, we can double the damage done by our charge shot to break through it. We can then use the remainder of our Navicus space to maximize our HP. I actually chose not to use the HP plus 700 for a few of the tries, because it reduces the number of chips in our gauge by 2, meaning we only have 3 chips out of our folder and we'll need to get really lucky to get either Northwind or grass stage. In these battles, we can easily avoid almost everything except the electric rush. The best thing I can think of when Base uses this attack is to just get in front of him and try to make him flinch to interrupt his attack as soon as possible, although we're almost definitely going to take 300 damage from it. This is also important because I'm pretty sure that Base's aura gets reinstated at the end of this particular attack, but I was too focused on trying to survive to notice whether or not that was true. He has an attack that summons 2 of Gospel's claws onto our stage and then uses Gospel's head to send out a flame attack. But this is also reasonable to avoid, even if it is relatively fast. I make a few too many avoidable mistakes, but we get a lot farther before we go down, almost taking Base to half HP. After this, I try to switch up the loadout to include Breakbuster and use the HP plus 700, resetting until I get a Northwind chip in my starting chipset. This battle goes much better than before, but I honestly don't know why I tried this, since Breakbuster doesn't seem to do anything in this battle. However, we do make it to 800 HP for Base, almost entirely due to better dodging and more HP to tank his electric rush. When he hits 800 though, he moves onto our side and slams the 3 panels in front of him and then recovers his aura. I immediately go to my chips, but I don't have my second Northwind readily available. I've wasted a lot of time with the custom gauge full when I could have been cycling through and getting that Northwind ready. I wasn't expecting his aura to come back, and I realized that I'm not going to win this particular battle. During the next several tries, I make it much farther by making sure that I use the add function in the custom window. This allows you to get more chips in the custom window the next time you open it, in exchange for not using any chips until the gauge fills up again, which is what I'm doing anyway. So I basically cycle through and do my normal thing, but make sure that I add as many chips as possible. We end up getting a few grass stage chips, but because I was trying out the clearly useless Breakbuster here instead of weapon level ups, the grass stages are useless. Eventually, we get and use our second Northwind chip. Base uses some crazy cannon attack with Gospel's head that destroys a bunch of our panels, and we bring him down to 330 HP just as he brings us down to 1. However, right after this attack, he brings out his aura for a third time, and without a third Northwind in our folder, we have no way of being able to break through it. At this point, I decide that I have 2 more strategies I can pursue. One is to max out HP entirely, which can get us to a maximum of 2060 HP while still keeping our Buster max. The other is to return to the weapon level up strategy. This way, even if we run out of the 2 Northwinds, we'll still be able to use our Flamethrower Charge Shot alongside Grass Stage to get rid of his aura as many times as we can. I try one fight with the weapon level up loadout that gets him to 390 HP, but we still lose. What I didn't realize though is that I actually forgot to save after changing my Navicus programs, so I accidentally went into the next battle with my Breakbuster loadout, the one that doesn't do anything. I realized this a little too late, but despite me using the same suboptimal loadout as before, this was a very different battle. As always, we start off with Northwind to remove his aura. One of the things I do differently this time is to more proactively use the Gatling Buster. There are plenty of times that Base is not in the row in front of me, but I shoot my Buster just in case he does move in front. I likely won't be able to get the full clip of 6 or 7 pellets into Base if he just waltzes into my Gatling Buster, but even the 10 to 20 damage is useful if it interrupts his attacks. We also get a bit lucky with RNG on his Electric Rush, as sometimes there's a row that's semi-safe early on in the attack. The strategy is to punish him for missing with his basic attack as often as possible as well. We're even able to interrupt his Gospel Fire Breath attack. During this particular run, we're able to get Base below half health before he even hits us once. I was so shocked at how well this was going that I almost forgot to work on securing the next Northwind chip. This is also where I start taking a lot more hits. Even though we have 2 Grass Stage chips available, we're not going to be able to make use of them given that we don't have the weapon level ups here, meaning that our Flamethrower does 50 damage and will only double to 100 damage on the grass, which is not enough to remove the aura. I finally get the second Northwind chip, and now we need to defeat Base before he resummons that aura. We get him down to 10 HP while we have 160 ourselves, meaning that we can take 2 hits with the Undershirt program equipped. He uses the Electric Rush and we take a hit, but we're able to trade it with our Gatling Buster and defeat Base with just 1 HP remaining. That was a ton of fun, and so much harder than Battle Network 2's Base. Mega Man tells Base that he lost because he doesn't trust an operator. Even though Serenade and Base are secret bosses, they're not completely out of left field since Capcom had referenced them multiple times in the story, and everything that we've seen this far about summoning Base, from him eating the bug frags to recover to this comment about the operator, ties in line with the story. With that, we've beaten every major boss in the game, most multiple times. While these bosses do have Omega forms, this video has gone on long enough. I didn't feel like there was enough of a difference to justify showing you another Metal Man fight. I know that this has been a long video, so thank you for all of your patience and sticking with me. Next up is Battle Network 4 with the same challenge, as well as streaming Battle Network 3 white version with only bug style. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Your support has been amazing, and I'm super excited to keep up the momentum. See you next time.